The icon of the hillbilly can be read through the theory of repression, presented by Sigmund Freud in Civilization and its Discontents. The prominent idea presented by Freud is that natural human instincts such as aggression, primitiveness, and sexual desire are repressed in order for humans to adapt and conform to civilization. The hillbilly is positioned as the opposite to the repressed self in relation to Freud's theory, and represents the uncivilized human being who has not suppressed innate feelings and desires, and therefore does not conform to society or civilization. Freud states that there are inner animalistic desires which cannot be brought into civilization as they threaten order. It is a certain fact that all the things with which we seek to protect ourselves are part of that very civilization. Freud presents the idea that civilization acts as a protector to outside dangers. Freud advances on this view through the word culture and its meaning. Freud discusses the basic understanding of culture. The word culture describes the sum of the achievements and institutions which differentiate our lives from those of our animal forebears and serves two purposes, that of protecting humanity against nature and of regulating the relations of human beings among themselves. Culture, as seen by Freud, is a system which civilizes and regulates humanity, differentiating human life from animalistic tendencies. The idea of the repressed self is therefore presented through Freud's views on the creation and maintenance of civilization and culture. Freud's theory is built upon the fact that instinct is suppressed in order for civilization to thrive, and that this civilization leads to the highest quality of human life. Freud believes that culture is the highest manifestation of human satisfaction, even if it means repressing natural human desire and instinct. Critic Robert Paul extends on this view. Freud is clearly on the side of those who would argue that the social dimension of existence does not sit entirely comfortably on us, but it is in conflict with some other factor. There is therefore a confliction between natural human instinct and conformity within the repressed self. Through the theory of repression in civilization, Freud's framework leads to an examination of the hillbilly in modern culture and society. The belief that humans represent the repressed self in civilization can be contrasted with the oppositional position of the hillbilly. This opposition sets the hillbilly up as an icon that is not repressing or renouncing inner desires or the dangerous instinctual behaviours that Freud identifies. Indeed, the hillbilly in modern society is constantly presented as an outsider, a figure who is not considered part of civilization and is degraded for not adhering to perceived notions of what it is to be civilized. The hillbilly is therefore a contradiction to the repressed self examined by Freud. In popular societal depictions and media stereotypes, the hillbilly is presented as an animalistic other, an unkempt and uncivilized figure on the periphery of society and out of sync with popular culture. The hillbilly seem to embody the very desires which Freud suggests are repressed in order for civilization to flourish: sexual desire, aggression, and instinctive behavior. Critic Anthony Harkin furthers this view in his theory of the icon of the hillbilly and explains how upper classes in American society denigrate working-class southern whites and use slurs to define the benefits of civilization through negative counterexample. The hillbilly is seen as a negative figure, one who is uncivilized, an icon of anti-civilization and an opposition to the repressed self presented by Freud. The hillbilly is used as a counterpoint to civilization. To Harkin, the hillbilly is isolated from modern civilization and is seen to embody three defining factors: poverty, ignorance, primitiveness. Through Harkin's analysis of the hillbilly and the image of the hillbilly, it is undeniable that the hillbilly is a counter to civilization and represents the opposite of the repressed self. As such, the hillbilly is positioned as a low-class figure in society and is degraded as to do not fit into mainstream culture and civilization. The two systems Freud states are necessary for human survival, satisfaction, and advancement, leaving the hillbilly as a regressive figure who has not abandoned natural instinct and desire.
But why is this? And how does the hillbilly relate to white privilege and intersectionality? All of race is a human construct of civilization. With race comes a social, cultural hierarchy. Within this theoretical hierarchy, the culture that is the most dominant determines both the classes of civilization and the social hierarchy itself. Another theory explains that within the United States, the white culture rules as the most dominant culture. With white culture being the most dominant comes the existence of socially constructed norm of white privilege. Gita Gulati and Maggie Potchuk define white culture and white privilege extensively in their article, Paying Attention to White Culture and Privilege, a Missing Link in Advancing Racial Equity, saying, "By white culture we mean the dominant, unquestioned standards of behavior and ways of functioning embodied by the vast majority of institutions in the United States. Because it is so normalized, it can be hard to see. In many ways it is indistinguishable from what we might call U.S. culture or norms, but it operates in even more subtle ways by actually defining what normal is, and likewise what professional, effective, or even good is. In turn, white culture also defines what is not good, at risk, or unsustainable. White culture values some ways that are more familiar and come more naturally to those from a white Western tradition of thinking, behaving, deciding, and knowing, while devaluing or rendering invisible other ways, and it does this without ever having to explicitly say so. In a civilization, the inevitable existence of a dominant group results in privilege catering to that group. The culture becomes standard or norm to what society models itself after, and this can be especially seen in the United States. Many people believe that in the United States, white culture is dominant, and from this the whites develop white privilege, defining what the social norms are. This practice of discrimination and oppression is the main theory of intersectionality. Intersectionality can be defined as how multiple and interrelated inequality dimensions are dealt with within political agendas and what factors or methods contribute to their incorporation, meaning the method of how a dominating culture deals with the lower classes, in this case how white culture views and deals with the perceived inequality within society. But what does this have to do with the hillbilly? Through analyzing the hillbilly, we could infer that civilization uses privilege and intersectionality to determine the norms and standards of society. This would mean civilization uses intersectionality against the unrepressed selves because they are perceived to be lower in culture, stature, and class to that of civilization. In this case, the hillbilly could represent the unrepressed self of Freud's theory. The hillbilly is stereotypically presented and perceived as more vulgar and less moral than the civil people in the United States, those with white privilege, in this case middle-class and upper-class whites. Due to the hillbilly's association with lack of human regression, although they are also white, they are perceived as non-white, lower class, and therefore do not benefit from white privilege. Intersectionality in American culture could be shown through both the hillbilly's representation in mainstream media and the discrimination against the hillbilly. The hillbilly could be seen as discriminated against by the dominating middle class through media representation. Because the privileged classes in America believe that the hillbilly is inferior to them, the media representations of the hillbilly usually contain a distorted view of them, meant for the privileged classes to mock. These methods of intersectionality demonstrate an effort to make sure the hillbilly knows its place in the social hierarchy, which creates a socially constructed class divide between privileged whites and hillbillies. This can be seen in the hit American TV show, Jerry Springer. From the following clips, it can be inferred that the Jerry Springer show is meant to target and degrade the hillbilly, with both the crowd and host often laughing at the expense of the hillbilly on stage. This can be seen at multiple points throughout the video, most notably when Jerry mocks the hillbilly's vernacular in the beginning.
We're talking here with David, who is really a charming guy, except that he
now, I have to say now, it ain't like I'm trying to come between Ashley and Lil Wayne, okay?
You what?
I ain't trying to come totally between Ashley and Lil Wayne, okay? Cause now, if he ain't got to leave the train.
You don't want to come between Ashley and Lil Wayne?
When Jerry goads the hillbilly into demonstrating karate moves simply for the intention of mocking him, followed by the audience responding with laughs and cheers.
I want you to know when he comes out here.
Yeah.
That I watch a lot of Chucky Norris and Jean-Claude Van Damme movies. In front of my mirror, I've practiced it and I've studied it a great deal and I've got this down pat. And he comes out here acting a fool, I'm gonna kung fu him. And all you big boys just stay back, let me do my thing.
So you have mastered the kung fu, and you've mastered it because you watch their movies?
Well, I watch it in front of that mirror, I can do it just like him.
Could you just kind of show us something right now?
Like a good kung fu chop like that, you know, and then like a good roundhouse kick, you know.
Let's do it again. Whoa!
And finally, when they bring the other man out, specifically with the intention to watch them fight each other, while the audience laughs at the perceived lower class.
Here's Lil Wayne.
Coming, man. I've been with 8 months. We're about
This concept is further explored in the noble savage argument.
The theoretical construct which would seem to oppose the views of Freud would be that of the noble savage and all the theory that surrounds this character.
The English dictionary defines a noble savage as
a literary stock character that expresses the concept of an idealized indigene, outsider, or other who has not been corrupted by civilization and therefore symbolizes humanity's innate goodness. Given the hillbillies' distant relationship with civilization, it could be argued that they represent the modern US noble savage character. Since it is civilization that corrupts humans, the disregard and rejection of civilization by the redneck through the lens of the noble savage archetype would typify them as pure. This theoretical construct therefore opposes the views of Freud, as Freud believed that mankind are inherently evil and saw civilization as a mechanism to curb their evil impulses. The noble savage concept, however, sees mankind as inherently good, with civilization the root cause of evil, an idea that is first attributed to the 3rd Earl of Shaftesbury, who postulated that the moral sense in humans is natural and innate and based on feelings. It was this way of thinking that was later extrapolated to uncivilized indigenous figures. Initially, this was in response to the native population of America, present when Europeans first began colonizing American soil. However, I believe there are a number of parallels that mean the archetype of the noble savage can be revised and adapted in order to be applied to the hillbilly. For instance, in his influential essay Of Cannibals, Michel de Montaigne, one of the theorists most closely linked to the noble savage, writes of the way in which skepticism is harboured against values and practices which are foreign to one's own, saying, "One calls barbarism whatever he is not accustomed to." This closed-minded behaviour is seen in the US's attitudes towards hillbillies throughout all forms of media. For example, it is clear from a quick Google search of redneck or hillbilly that the civilized general public's view of the working-class southerner is filled with mockery and contempt. The top result in Urban Dictionary for the definition of redneck lists a series of cultural practices which they believe characterize redneck culture. The prejudiced closed-mindedness referenced in Montaigne's essay is evidenced here in the hegemonic characterization of the working-class southerner, with examples including, "You would be a redneck if you think mud wrestling should be an Olympic sport." Here we see the redneck vernacular being parodied and mocked as though they are speaking an entirely different language, therefore branding them as a cultural other. "You would be a redneck if your wife weighs more than your refrigerator." Here, the mockery moves on to the redneck's physical appearance, stereotyping their aesthetic and making fun of their weight. "You would be a redneck if you think that potted meat on saltine is an hors d'oeuvre." This line would appear to be referencing a difference in taste. However, as with all the examples just given, beneath the surface lies an undercurrent of capitalist elitism, with a difference in taste really signifying a difference in class. The mockery inherent in this line stems from the fact that redneck communities are typically very poor, meaning that, firstly, they do not generally get the exposure to certain other cultures, high culture in particular, so their concept of an hors d'oeuvre is wrong, at least in the eyes of the author, and presumably all of the 13,000 people that voted for his or her definition. Secondly, they cannot afford high-quality cuisine, with saltine crackers and potted meat being two of the cheapest items you can find in supermarkets. From these examples, it is apparent that the difference between cultures, referenced by Montaigne, causes the redneck to be viewed with disdain by the general public. As mentioned, when you go beyond the denotative surface level of the prejudices held against redneck culture, it is clear that they are really prejudices held against poor culture, or, more accurately, the lower class. This has covered how and why the redneck figure is seen as the modern-day savage, but I will now explore the ways in which this could be paired with the word noble. Much of this video has covered the negative portrayal of the hillbilly. However, there are also aspects of hillbilly culture that are regarded positively. For example, Anthony Harkins talked of how the hillbilly personified characteristics associated with the nation's founders and settlers, which many Americans saw as endangered by a modern, industrialized, and increasingly atomized society. This idealized connection to the past therefore pairs the hillbilly with cultural beliefs and values that reside at the core of US ideology. This is particularly poignant in a country such as America, which puts a great emphasis on its founding story and the following patriotism that comes with it. Such elements include the pioneer spirit, strong family and kin networks, a clear sense of gender roles, a closeness to nature and the land, authenticity and purity, rugged individualism and a powerful sense of self, and the whole sense of average people as opposed to scientific and bureaucratic ways of thinking. This would therefore support the grounding theory of the noble savage, with uncivilized individuals being inherently moral, or, in the words of Rousseau, "Men in a state of nature do not know good and evil, but their independence, along with the peacefulness of their passions and their ignorance of vice, keep them from doing ill. It is therefore the exposure to civilized society, in this case mainstream US culture, that corrupts one's noble virtues. This standpoint is antithetical to the derogatory views of rednecks previously demonstrated. The reason for these polarized readings of the redneck is that the figurehead of the working-class Southerner is used to simultaneously represent two oppositional sides to American ideology. Firstly, a romanticized encapsulation of America's past and the values associated with the frontiersmen and the early settlers. In this regard, America needs the archetype of the hillbilly in order to secure the country to its roots. The second reading, however, sees the hillbilly in obstruction to modernity and the American strive for perpetual progression. Their simple way of life is seen as regressive and poses a threat to the seemingly insatiable forces of science and technology. All the positive character traits just listed are therefore intrinsically paired with a negative binary. Some of the examples that Anthony Harkins gives are strong kin connections might mean inbreeding, domestic violence, and bloody feuds. Rugged individualism could also be interpreted as stubbornness and an inability to adapt to changing conditions. And closeness to nature could stand for primitiveness, savagery, and sexual promiscuity. The hillbilly is therefore an ambiguous icon of American culture, straddling the boundary of cultural exaltation and contempt. In many ways, their refusal of hegemonic societal precepts makes them incompatible with contemporary American ideology. However, at the same time, they serve a function in the canon of American culture, acting as both a reincarnation of America's past values and as a counterpoint for civilized society to juxtapose itself against. Therefore, regardless of whether the hillbilly is seen as a positive or negative American icon, it is clear that they are a necessary one.